the Heliopolitan philosophy. A deep dive into Egypt's first and most complete system of sacred thought, the self-created God, the nine who shaped existence, the first time before time, the solar soul of all things, how one city's theology became the mother of Western mysticism. Personal Reading Series, May 2026. Helingni 10, Prominent, Contents, Introduction, Why Heliopolis Still Matters. Part 1, On in the Land of Kemet, the City of the Sun. Part 2, Nun, the Primordial Ocean Before Everything. Part 3, Adam, the Self-Created God. Part 4, the Benben, the First Mound and the First Act. Part 5, Shu and Tefnut, the First Pair and the Principle of Duality. Part 6, Jeb and Nut, Earth and Sky, Separated by Air. Part 7, the Four Children, Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. Part 8, the Great Ennead, 9 is the number of completion. Part 9, Zeb Tepi, the First Time in the Eternal Now. Part 10, Ari and the Solar Theology, Day, Night, and the Duat. Part 11, Adam Ra, the Unity that Holds All the Names. Part 12, the Heliopolitan Afterlife, the Solar Path. Part 13, the Bennu Bird, Phoenix, Renewal, and the Soul's Return. Part 14, Heliopolitan Legacy, What This Philosophy Gave the World. Part 15, Heliopolis and Haligricity, Where the Paths Cross. Introduction. Most people who are curious about ancient Egypt encounter it through its famous monuments, the pyramids, the Sphinx, the gold mask of Tutankhamun, or through its dramatic mythology, Isis gathering the scattered pieces of Osiris, Horus battling Set, the weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at. These are real and important, but they are the decoration on the surface of something far deeper, a complete philosophical system that the ancient Egyptians developed over more than 3,000 years, centered in the city they called on and the Greeks called Heliopolis, the City of the Sun. The Heliopolitan philosophy is among the oldest systematic attempts in recorded human history to answer the questions that every conscious being eventually asks. What existed before the world? How did existence arise from nothing? What is the nature of the divine? What is the self? What happens after death? And what is the relationship between the single source of all things and the bewildering multiplicity of everything that exists? These are not primitive questions with primitive answers. The Heliopolitan system is philosophically sophisticated, internally coherent, and remarkably resonant with both quantum physics and the deepest teachings of the world's mystical traditions. Its concept of Nun anticipates the quantum vacuum. Its self-created God Atum prefigures the Advaita Vedanta teaching of Brahman before creation. Its nine-deity cosmological structure maps the stages by which pure undifferentiated consciousness becomes the differentiated world of experience. And its solar theology, the daily cycle of radium through sky and underworld, is one of the most complete metaphors for the soul's journey ever constructed. This guide is a deep and complete exploration of the Heliopolitan philosophy, its history, its theology, its cosmology, its afterlife doctrine, its influence on everything that came after it, and its living relevance for the hologric practitioner today. On in the land of Kemet, the City of the Sun, the physical city. Heliopolis, called on in ancient Egyptian, meaning pillar or place of pillars, was one of the oldest and most sacred cities in all of ancient Egypt. Located at the southern tip of the Nile Delta, roughly where the modern suburb of Matariya sits within Greater Cairo, it was for thousands of years the intellectual and theological capital of the Egyptian world. Very little of ancient Heliopolis physically survives. The city was systematically quarried throughout late antiquity and the medieval period, its stones used to build Cairo, its obelisks carried to Rome, Constantinople, and eventually Paris, London, and New York. A single obelisk of Sesostris I, standing about 21 meters tall, remains on site as the oldest standing obelisk in Egypt, the Great Temple of Ra-Atum, which once covered an area larger than the temple complex at Karnak, and was described by ancient visitors as one of the wonders of the world, is entirely gone. What we know of Heliopolis comes primarily from texts, religious papyri, pyramid inscriptions, and the reports of classical visitors including Strabo and Herodotus. The role of Heliopolis in Egyptian religion. To understand Heliopolis is to understand that ancient Egyptian religion was not a single unified system, but a collection of regional theologies that sometimes competed, sometimes complemented, and sometimes merged with each other. The three most important theological centers were Heliopolis, Memphis, and Hermopolis. Heliopolis was the oldest and, for most of Egyptian history, the most prestigious of these centers. The Heliopolitan creation narrative, Adam arising from Nun, the self-creation, the sequential generation of the Ennead, was the dominant creation theology from the Old Kingdom onward and was incorporated into the pyramid texts. When later pharaohs sought to honor the divine or legitimate their own rule, they almost invariably worked within the Heliopolitan theological framework. Heliopolitan priests were considered the supreme religious authorities in Egypt. They were astronomers, mathematicians, physicians, and philosophers simultaneously, the tradition that Plato and Pythagoras reported learning from. The Greek concept of the philosopher-priest, the Renaissance ideal of the universal scholar, and the Druidic model of the Druid as judge, healer, astronomer, philosopher all carry Heliopolitan DNA. Nun, the primordial ocean before everything, before Adam, before the gods, before the Ben Mound, before light, before form, before time itself, there was none. What Nun is? Nun is the primordial ocean, the infinite, dark, formless, perfectly still body of water from which all existence emerged. Nun is not water in the physical sense. The Egyptians were sophisticated enough to understand that they were describing something that precedes and underlies all physical things, including water itself. Nun is the pre-existing substrate, the infinite field of undifferentiated potential from which every specific thing that would ever exist was waiting to emerge. Crucially, the Egyptians did not consider Nun to be empty, negative, or evil. Nun is not the absence of existence, it is the fullness of potential existence before that potential has taken any specific form. Every possibility is present in Nun, waiting. In this sense, Nun is not the void but the womb, the creative darkness that is pregnant with everything. Nun as ongoing reality, one of the most philosophically sophisticated aspects of the Heliopolitan understanding of Nun, is that Nun did not cease to exist when creation began. Nun persists. The primordial ocean continues to surround and underlie all of creation. It is the water that the sky goddess Nut holds above the earth, the water that wells up from underground springs, the water that fills the Nile and makes life possible. The created world exists as an island or bubble within Nun, and Egyptian cosmology is acutely aware that this bubble could dissolve back into the primordial ocean at any time. This awareness is not nihilistic but deeply ecological. The world is not a permanent, self-sustaining structure, but an ongoing achievement maintained by the active work of the gods, particularly the daily solar journey of Ra, which is what keeps the world lit, ordered, and alive. When Ra no longer makes his daily journey, creation returns to Nun. This gives every dawn a quality of miraculous gift rather than mere mechanical repetition. Nun in the pyramid texts. The pyramid texts, the oldest substantial religious literature in the world, reference Nun extensively. The dead pharaoh's journey through the Duat is understood partly as a journey through Nun, the primordial waters that surround the created world. The pharaoh, traveling with radium through the night, passes through Nun and is renewed by it, emerging with Ra at dawn reborn, as Nun's infinite potential is reorganized into specific form once again. This is the Egyptian mystery of night as renewal, rather than mere absence. Connection to heligricity. Nun is the Egyptian name for the same infinite field of undifferentiated potential that appears in every tradition heligricity draws from: the quantum vacuum in modern physics, the Hindu Brahman before creation, the Taoist Wuqi, and New Thought's infinite field of possibilities described in Real Magic, an introduction by Holly Sarah Parsons. The Egyptians did not imagine this concept, they perceived it. Nun is what is actually here before any particular thing appears. Every creative act, in art, in manifestation, in healing, begins by touching Nun, by returning to the state of open, dark, receptive potential before the specific form arrives. Adam, the self-created God. From the waters of Nun, without any external cause or creator, Adam arose. This is the central philosophical claim of the Heliopolitan system, and it is one of the most radical theological propositions ever articulated. The first divine being was self-created. The name and its meaning. The name Adam carries two simultaneous and complementary meanings: the all and the nothing, or alternatively, the complete and the not yet. Adam is the totality that contains everything and the emptiness from which everything will emerge. He is both the end and the beginning, the completed whole and the not yet differentiated potential. This double meaning is not an accident or a contradiction, it is the precise philosophical statement the Heliopolitan theologians were making. Atum is the totality of existence before it has taken specific forms. He is neither pure potential nor the differentiated world of specific things. Atum is the consciousness, the first act of divine self-awareness that stands at the threshold between the two. He who came into being by himself. The pyramid texts describe Adam as Keper Jaseph, he who came into being by himself. This is the doctrine of divine self-creation, and it is the Heliopolitan answer to the fundamental philosophical question: if everything has a cause, what caused the first thing? The Heliopolitan answer is that the first divine being had no external cause. It arose spontaneously from Nun through an act of pure self-will. Adam willed himself into existence. The theologians were aware of the circular logic and appear to have considered this circularity not a logical failure, but a precise description of what divine self-creation actually is. It cannot be fully explained by cause and effect logic because it is the source of cause and effect logic. It precedes it. Adam as the complete human form. Adam was typically depicted in human form as a man wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. This is significant. In a tradition that depicted most deities in animal-headed form, Atum was shown as fully human. He is the divine in its most complete integrated form, not associated with one specific aspect of creation, but encompassing all of them. The pyramid texts describe Adam as containing within himself both male and female principles. He is the divine androgyne, the unity that holds all polarities before they separate into the complementary pairs that will structure the created world. In later texts, Adam is explicitly said to have masturbated or sneezed to produce the first divine pair, a deliberately physical, embodied description of spiritual self-creation. The Egyptians were not squeamish about using the body as a philosophical metaphor. Atum and human identity. One of the most profound implications of Heliopolitan theology is the relationship it establishes between Atum and the human soul. The pyramid texts address the dead pharaoh directly as Atum, the departed king, is told that he will be reunited with the first god, that his soul will be received back into the totality from which it came. In later periods, this identification was extended beyond pharaohs to any person who had lived in accordance with Ma'at. This is the Heliopolitan version of a teaching that appears across the world's deepest mystical traditions, that the individual human consciousness and the universal divine consciousness are ultimately the same. The difference between the human soul and Atum is not one of fundamental nature, but of scale and individuated form. You are, at your deepest level, what Atum is, a specific expression of the self-created, self-knowing totality. Connection to Heligricity. The Heliopolitan teaching that the first divine being was self-created, that existence itself arose from within itself, through an act of pure self-knowing will, is one of the most direct ancient precedents for the central heligric principle that consciousness is the primary creative force. Atum's self-creation is the template for everything the tetrality describes: feeling, thinking, speaking, doing. Atum did not receive creation from elsewhere. He created himself by knowing himself, and in knowing himself, called all of creation into being. Every heligric practice that moves the practitioner toward genuine self-knowledge is a return to the Atum principle. The Benben, the first mound, and the first act. When Atum arose from the waters of Nun, he needed somewhere to stand. The primordial ocean had no solid ground. And so the first act of creation, even before the creation of the other gods, was the emergence of the Benben, the first solid land, the primordial mound rising above the limitless waters. What the Benben is. The Benben was the first solid place, the original ground of being. In the Heliopolitan cosmology, Atum stood upon the Benben and, from this first stable point, performed the acts of creation that would bring the rest of the universe into existence. The Benben was housed in a specific shrine at Heliopolis called the House of the Benben, which was the holiest precinct of the city and accessible only to the highest-ranking priests. The physical object, a cone or pyramid-shaped stone, was kept there as the sacred relic of the first moment of creation. No one outside the priesthood ever saw it. The Benben's architectural legacy directly inspired two of the most enduring the shape of the Benben, a raised, pointed mound architectural forms in human history. The pyramid form begins here. Egyptian pyramids were understood as cosmic Benben mounds, enormous built representations of the first solid ground, which the deceased pharaoh could stand upon to rise into the sky. The word pyramid carries this implication. The pyramiden was specifically called a Benben stone, and was often gilded to catch and reflect the first light of dawn. The obelisk form also derives from the Benben. An obelisk is a stretched vertical Benben, a pillar of stone topped with a pyramidion, oriented toward the sky. Heliopolis was filled with obelisks. Its very Egyptian name, Iunu, means pillar city. The obelisks that now stand in Rome, Paris, London, and New York were originally Heliopolitan sacred objects, built to connect earth and sky at the axis of the first mound. The Benben as cosmological principle. Beyond its architectural expression, the Benben represents a profound cosmological principle, the necessity of a stable ground of being before differentiation can occur. Atum cannot create Shu and Tefnut while floating formlessly in Nun. He needs to stand somewhere. Creation requires a point of stability, a center around which the rest of reality can organize. This is the philosophical meaning of the Benben. Before manifestation, there must be a point of orientation. Before the multiplicity of the created world can unfold, there must be a singular reference point from which all directions can be established. The Benben is that point. In the language of modern physics, it is the singularity, the dimensionless point before space and time expand from it. Connection to heligricity. The Benben principle that creation requires a stable center before differentiation can occur is the cosmological basis for the heligric understanding of grounding. Before any spiritual practice, before any creative act, before any expansion into new territory of consciousness, the practitioner establishes a ground. This is what Jipak does at the beginning of energy work. This is what the opening of sacred space does at the beginning of ritual. This is what carving does for the physical body. The Benben is the energetic prototype of every grounding practice. You cannot rise without first having somewhere to stand. Shu and Tefnut, the first pair, and the principle of duality. Standing on the Benben, Atum performed the second great act of creation. He brought forth the first divine pair. This is the moment when unity becomes duality, when the undifferentiated all begins to separate into the complementary opposites that will structure all subsequent reality. The act of creation. The Heliopolitan texts describe Atum's creation of Shu and Tefnut in frankly physical terms. In one version, Atum masturbates and his semen becomes the two gods. In another, he sneezes out Shu and spits out Tefnut. In a third, he speaks their names and they come into existence. These variant accounts are not inconsistent. They are approaching the same philosophical event from different angles. The first is an act of generative power. The second is an act of emanation from the divine body. The third is the creative power of the word. All three accounts agree on what was created, Shu and Tefnut. These are not merely personifications of weather phenomena. They are the first cosmic principles of duality, the complementary pair without which neither could exist. Shu and light, firstborn of Atum. Principle of the breath that separates and sustains Shu is air in its most essential form, not wind, but the medium through which all things exist. Breathe and move. He is typically depicted as a man with an ostrich feather on his head, and is shown kneeling with his arms raised, holding up the body of the sky goddess Nut above the reclining form of Jeb the earth. Shu's cosmic function is separation. He is what holds earth and sky apart and makes the space between them possible. Without Shu's perpetual act of lifting, Nut and Geb would collapse back into undifferentiated union and the world would cease. Shu is the divine effort of creation's maintenance, the ongoing act of holding the conditions of existence open. Tefnut, lady of moisture and Ma'at, firstborn pair of Atum, principle of the moisture that nourishes and balances. Tefnut is moisture, dew, atmospheric water, the principle of sacred wetness, without which nothing on earth can live. Depicted as a lioness-headed woman and is closely associated with Mat, the principle of cosmic truth and order. In some texts, Tefnut is Mat, the moisture that nourishes the world, is the same force that keeps the world in right relationship. In the myth of the distant goddess, Tefnut quarrels with Ra and retreats to Nubia in lion form, taking with her all the moisture and warmth. The world becomes parched and cold. Only Thoth's wisdom and persuasion can bring her back. And when she returns, the world is renewed with rain and life. This myth encodes the Egyptian understanding of drought and inundation, the necessity of the feminine principle for life, and the power of wisdom and right speech to restore cosmic balance. The philosophical significance of the first pair. The creation of Shu and Tefnut is the Heliopolitan philosophy's account of how undifferentiated unity becomes the structured duality that makes a world possible. Before Shu and Tefnut, there is only Atum, complete, undivided, containing everything. After Shu and Tefnut, there is the first pairing of complementary principles, dry and moist, light and dark, separation and union. All subsequent creation will follow this template of complementary pairs, Jeb and Nut, Osiris and Isis, Set and Nephthys, the Chinese concept of yin and yang, the Druidic concept of the Holly King and Oak King, the Tantric concepts of Shiva and Shakti, the Hermetic principle of gender. The Heliopolitan Shu and Tefnut are the Egyptian name for the same universal recognition. Reality is structured as complementary polarity, and neither pole is complete without the other. Connection to holographicity. Shu and Tefnut are the Heliopolitan articulation of the principle that the Hermetic tradition calls the principle of gender, the teaching that every created thing contains both masculine and feminine principles. This is the seventh Hermetic principle in the Kybalion. In holographicity, this understanding grounds the recognition that genuine creative power requires the integration of both, that feeling and doing are equally necessary dimensions of the tetrality. The practitioner who suppresses either their receptive depth or their projective power cannot create fully. Shu without Tefnut is dryness and sterility. Tefnut without Shu is formless moisture with nowhere to go. Creation requires both. Geb and Nut, earth and sky, separated by air. Shu and Tefnut united, and from their union came the second divine pair, Geb and Nut. This generation represents the creation of the physical universe as we experience it, the solid ground beneath our feet and the vast expanse above us. Jeb, the living earth. Geb is the earth god, depicted as a reclining man, his body being the earth itself. His skin is often shown as dark or green. His laughter causes earthquakes. His body is the ground on which all life stands. When the dead are buried and return to the earth, they are received into Geb's body. Jeb is associated with fertility, abundance, and the sustaining generosity of the land. He is also the father of Osiris, and therefore the grandfather of Horus. The divine lineage runs through him into the mythology that most shaped Egyptian theology. In the pyramid texts, the pharaoh's claim to legitimate rule is grounded in his descent from Geb. To be the rightful king is to be the son of the earth, rooted in the land you govern, not the body of the sky. Nut is the sky goddess, depicted as a woman whose body arches over the earth, her fingers touching the western horizon and her toes touching the eastern horizon, her star-covered belly the night sky above. She is one of the most visually powerful deities in the entire Egyptian system. The sky is a woman's body, and the stars are her skin. Nut swallows the sun every evening as he sets in the west and gives birth to him again every dawn in the east. The sun travels through her body each night, through her divine interior, which is the Duat, and is reborn at dawn. This makes Nut the mother of the solar cycle, and one of the most intimate theological concepts in Egyptian religion. The night sky is not empty space, but the body of the Divine Mother, through whom the source of life passes, and from whom it is continually reborn. In the Heliopolitan system, Nut and Geb were originally locked in continuous sexual union, earth and sky pressed together. The space between them collapsed into oneness. It was Shu who separated them, lifting Nut's body away from Geb and holding it above, creating the space between earth and sky where all life would unfold. This is the Egyptian account of the creation of livable space, the atmosphere, the air we breathe, the light that fills the world, connection to holographicity. The image of Nut arching over Geb, her star-covered body as the sky, her swallowing of Ra each evening and giving birth to him each dawn, is one of the most complete ancient expressions of the divine feminine as cosmic container and regenerative source. Holographicity honors the divine feminine as equally fundamental to the divine masculine, and the Nut-Geb relationship encodes this recognition perfectly. The sky and the earth are both divine, both necessary, both in relationship. Nut, as regenerative mother, through whose body the sun must travel to be reborn, is the Heliopolitan theology behind the Heligric understanding that descent, darkness, and the body are not obstacles to the sacred, but the very medium through which renewal occurs. The four children Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. From the union of Geb and Nut came four children who together complete the Aeneid, and whose mythology shaped not just Egyptian theology, but the entire religious imagination of the Western world. These four are not simply the next generation in a divine family tree. They are the principles that govern all human experience: rulership, magic, chaos, and liminality. Osiris, the first king and the Lord of eternity, god of resurrection, ruler of the afterlife, principle of the cycle of death and renewal. Osiris was the first divine king of Egypt, the ruler who brought civilization, agriculture, and law to humanity. His myth is the most theologically important in all of Egyptian religion. His brother Set murdered him, dismembered his body, and scattered the pieces across Egypt. His wife and sister Isis searched the entire world for the pieces, reassembled them, and with the help of Anubis, performed the first mummification. Through her magic, Isis conceived their son Horus with Osiris's restored body. Osiris was resurrected, not back to earthly life, but to eternal life as the ruler of the afterlife. This myth is the Heliopolitan theology of death and renewal made narrative. The good king is killed, the land becomes barren, the beloved mourns and searches, the body is restored through devotion and wisdom, and from the restored body new life is conceived. Every human death participates in this pattern. Every Nile inundation was Osiris's body returning to make the land alive again. Osiris is perhaps the single most influential figure in all of religious history. His resurrection narrative is the direct template for the Christian resurrection story. His judgment of the dead is the template for Christian final judgment, and his identification with the dying and rising divine man appears in mystery cults across the ancient Mediterranean. Isis, the great of magic, goddess of healing, magic, wisdom, and the power of sacred love. Isis is the greatest magical practitioner in all of Egyptian mythology, and arguably the most widely worshipped goddess in the ancient world. Her cult eventually spread throughout the entire Roman Empire. What makes Isis theologically extraordinary is not her power, it is the source of her power, love. Every magical act Isis performs derives from her absolute devotion to Osiris and her determination that death will not be the final word about him. Isis is the goddess of Heka. She is also the great healer, the protector of the dead, and the divine mother whose image seated on a throne nursing the infant Horus directly influenced the Christian iconography of the Madonna and Child. Isis holds the secret name of Ra, which gives her authority over all creation. In Heliopolitan theology, to know the true name of a divine being is to have power over them, and Isis is the only being who knows Ra's true name. This makes her the philosophical holder of the deepest secret of existence, Set the necessary disruption, god of storms, chaos, the desert, and the principle of creative disorder. Set is one of the most misunderstood figures in Egyptian theology, particularly through the lens of later religious traditions that needed a clear cosmic villain. Set is not evil. He is the principle of necessary disruption, the force of chaos, change, and creative destruction. without which the ordered cosmos would stagnate. He is the desert that surrounds the fertile valley, the storm that breaks the drought, the fire that clears the forest for new growth. Set murdered Osiris, but this is not simply a crime story. In Egyptian cosmology, it is the necessary event that creates the conditions for resurrection, for Isis's magic, for Horus's quest for justice, and for the full revelation of what the divine is capable of. Without Set's act, none of these would have occurred. Set is also Ra's primary defender. It is Set who stands at the prow of the solar bark each night and battles Apophis to protect Ari's passage through the Duat. The same force that can destroy is also what protects. Set later became associated with foreign peoples and was eventually demonized in later Egyptian religion, particularly after the Persian conquest. But in original Heliopolitan theology, Set has a necessary and honored place in the cosmic order. Nephthys, the lady of the house, goddess of the threshold, the liminal, and the sacred witness. Nephthys is Set's wife and Isis' sister, and one of the most important figures for understanding the Heliopolitan vision of the sacred because she is the goddess of the in-between. She rules all liminal states, the threshold between life and death, the edge of the desert and the cultivated land, the moment between sleeping and waking, the boundary between what is known and what is not. Nephthys is the goddess who is present at death alongside Isis, while Isis is the magic that restores. Nephthys is the witness, the mourner, the guardian of the transition itself. Her presence at the moment of death is itself a protective act. She ensures that the threshold is held sacred, that the soul is not lost in the crossing. In funerary art, Isis and Nephthys are almost always shown together, one at the head and one at the feet of the deceased, their outstretched wings sheltering the body. The duality of these sisters, magic and witness, restoration and acceptance, the active and the receptivis, the Heliopolitan philosophy of how the sacred feminine holds the full spectrum of experience. The great Ennead 9 as the number of completion. The 9 deities of the Heliopolitan system Adam, Shu, Tefnut, Jeb, Nut, Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys together form what the Egyptians called the Peshijet, the Ennead, from the Greek word for 9. This grouping is not arbitrary. 9 was the most significant number in Egyptian sacred mathematics, the product of 3 multiplied by itself. 9 represented the full expansion of the creative principle into all of its possible expressions. The architecture of the 9. The structure of the Ennead is not just a family tree, it is a philosophical map of how consciousness becomes the world. Read as a sequence, the 9 deities describe the complete process of manifestation. Adam, pure self-created consciousness. The undivided whole, Shu and Tefnut, the first polarity, the primordial complementary pair. Unity differentiates into 2. Geb and Nut, the physical world. The second polarity, earth and sky, the created cosmos. Osiris and Isis, civilization, wisdom, and the power of sacred love. The principle of ordered human life and the magic that restores it when it breaks. Set and Nephthys, disruption and the liminal. The forces that challenge, destroy, and witness, without which renewal cannot occur. Read this way, the Ennead describes a complete cosmological process. Undivided consciousness differentiates into complementary principles which generate the physical world, within which conscious civilization arises and is continually tested and renewed by disruption and transition. This is mythology. It is philosophy, the Heliopolitan account of how reality works. Minor Ennead and extended family. The Heliopolitan system also recognized a minor Ennead, a second grouping of 9 deities representing the next generation of divine beings and the specific aspects of cosmic order they governed. Chief among these were Horus, Anubis, Thoth, and Hathor. Connection to holographicity. The Ennead is a philosophical map of manifestation consciousness becoming polarity. Polarity generating physical reality hosting civilized life. Civilized life requiring both the ordering principle and the disruptive principle to remain alive is one of the most complete ancient accounts of what holographicity calls the tetrality in its cosmic expression. Feeling, thinking, speaking, doing. The Ennead is the universe practicing the tetrality at cosmic scale. Zep Tepi, the first time, and the eternal now. Of all the concepts in the Heliopolitan philosophy, none is more philosophically sophisticated or more practically relevant than Zep Tepi, the first time. What Zep Tepi means. Zep Tepi refers to the moment of original creation, the moment when Adam arose from none, stood on the Benben, and initiated the sequence of divine generation that produced the world. But Zep Tepi is not merely a historical event. It is the most important theological concept in the Heliopolitan philosophy because the Egyptians understood it as eternally recurring. Every sunrise was a reenactment of Zep Tepi. Ara rising from the eastern horizon was Atum rising from the primordial waters of Nun. Every dawn was, at the same time, the very first dawn. Every night's darkness was the return to the pre-creation state of Nun, and every dawn's light was the first time happening again, fresh, original, unrepeated in its essence, even if repeated in its form. The ritual significance. This understanding had profound implications for Egyptian ritual practice. Every temple ritual was understood as a restoring of Zeptepias, a return to the original moment of perfection and power when the divine was most fully present in the world. The priest who performed the morning temple ritual was not simply maintaining a tradition they were reenacting the first time, restoring the world's connection to its origin. This is why Egyptian ritual was extraordinarily conservative. Any deviation from the established form was not merely improper, but cosmologically dangerous. To change the ritual was to risk not re-establishing Zep-Tepi correctly. The priest's precision was the priest's power and the world's safety. Zep-Tepi, an Egyptian sacred architecture. The orientation of Egyptian temples was not accidental. Temples were aligned with specific astronomical events so that at the correct moment, the first light of dawn would strike the innermost sanctuary of the Temple Holy of Holies, where the divine statue was kept. This beam of light, entering the sacred space at the precise moment it was calculated to arrive, was Zep-Tepi, the first light, touching the divine image and restoring creation. The orientation of Karnak Temple to the winter solstice sunrise, the Luxor Temple's alignment with the Nile flood, the Abu Simbel Temple's twice-annual illumination of the inner sanctuary, these are not curiosities. They are the most literal possible expression of the Zep-Tepi theology. The architect's job was to create a structure that would allow the first time to happen again, on schedule, forever. Connection to haligicity. Equal to Zep-Tepi is the Egyptian philosophical basis for one of the deepest haligric practices, the sacred rise. The rise of the day is not the same as any other time of day. It is the moment when Zep-Tepi recurs. When the world is born again from the primordial darkness, when the energy of original creation is most accessible. The haligric practitioner who meets the rise of the day consciously with deliberate breath, movement, intention, and gratitude is participating in Zep-Tepi. They are inserting themselves into the first time. This is the cosmological foundation of why the rise matters. It is not simply an arbitrary starting point. It is the moment when the universe itself is beginning again, and the practitioner who is awake at that moment can align with the creative force at its most original and powerful. Ra and the solar theology, day, night, and the duat. At the center of Heliopolitan religion is the sun, not as a ball of burning gas, but as the most direct and visible manifestation of divine creative power. The Heliopolitan solar theology is one of the most complete and philosophically rich accounts of the relationship between consciousness, light, time, and renewal ever developed. Ra, the sun is living consciousness. Ra is the primary solar deity of the Heliopolitan system, creative and sustaining power. Ra is not the sun itself expresses. The sun is Ra's eye, Ra's body. Ra's vehicle, solar intelligence, moves through the world. The manifestation of the sun's he is the divine consciousness, that the sun the physical form through which the divine. Ra has three primary forms corresponding to the three phases of the sun's daily journey. In the rise, he is Khepri, the scarab beetle, the self-created, the one who rolls the solar disk up from the eastern horizon just as the dung beetle rolls its ball of dung. At noon, he is Ra, the powerful, radiant, fully expressed solar force. In the evening, he is Adam, completing the cycle, returning to the state of the creator at rest before the cycle begins again. The solar bark, Ari's journey. The Heliopolitan solar theology describes Ra as traveling across the sky in a bark, the Manjet bark, during the day, and the Mesiktet bark during the night. The day journey is visible, the sun moving from east to west across the sky. The night journey is invisible and more theologically profound. Ra descends into the Duat and travels through its 12 hours, facing the dangers and powers of the deep before emerging reborn at dawn. The 12 hours of the night are documented in extraordinary detail in funerary texts, including the Amduat, the Book of Gates, and the Book of Caverns. Each hour has its own name, its own population of beings, its own challenges and powers. The 5th hour of the night, for instance, is the hour when Ra passes through the body of Sokar, the ancient funerary god, a passage through the most concentrated darkness. The 9th and 10th hours show Ra's forces battling Apophis, the enormous serpent of chaos who threatens to swallow the solar bark and end the world. Set stands at the prow and defeats Apophis with his spear. At the 12th hour, Ra passes through the body of the Ouroboros serpent and emerges from its mouth as Khepri reborn. Apophis, the anti-creation. Apophis is the great serpent of chaos, not a deity but a force, the embodiment of the principle of non-existence that constantly threatens to swallow the ordered world back into dissolution. Every night, Ra's Barke confronts Apophis in the deep hours of the Duat. Every night, the priests of Heliopolis performed rituals to assist Ra's defeat of Apophis, burning effigies, reciting curses, drawing the serpent's image only to erase it. The entire community's participation in cosmic order was understood as genuinely necessary. If the ritual was not performed, Apophis might win, radium might not emerge at dawn, and the world would end. This is not superstition. It is the Egyptian theological account of the relationship between human consciousness and cosmic order. The universe is not self-sustaining. Order is not guaranteed. The active, conscious participation of aware beings in maintaining the conditions of existence is genuinely required. Every dawn that comes is a victory. Every sunrise should be received with the recognition that the most dangerous darkness has been navigated successfully one more time. Connection to heligricity. The three-phase solar cycle Khepri-Ra, Atum maps onto the full R of any creative or conscious act. The heligric practitioner who begins a day, a project, a prayer, or a life brings themselves through Khepri, Ra, and Atum. The Heliopolitan solar cycle is not a description of the sun. It is a prescription for how conscious beings navigate time. The rise of the day is Khepri. The fullness of the day is Ra. The evening as Atum returning. Night as the duat, not absence, but the necessary passage through depth that makes dawn possible. Atum Ra, the unity that holds all the names. One of the most important and often misunderstood aspects of Egyptian theology is how the Egyptians related the different divine names to each other. Modern readers sometimes assume that Ra and Atum are simply two different gods, but this misses the Egyptian theological sophistication entirely, the principle of divine syncretism. The Egyptians developed a theological practice called syncretism, the deliberate merging of divine names and attributes to express a higher philosophical unity. When the priests of Heliopolis spoke of Atum Ra, they were not simply combining two names as a convenience. They were making a theological statement that the self-created primordial consciousness and the solar creative power are ultimately the same divine reality, experienced and named from different perspectives. This practice extended throughout Egyptian theology. Amun-Ra was the theological merger of the hidden and the visible. Ptah Sokar Osiris merged the creator god, the funerary god, and the resurrection god into one. These are not contradictions or confusions. They are the Egyptian way of saying that the divine is ultimately one, and that all the different names point to aspects of the same underlying reality. What this means philosophically: the Heliopolitan Atum-Ra syncretism encodes a profound philosophical statement. The source of all existence and the dynamic creative power that sustains the world are not separate. The stillness and the movement are the same. The before, creation completeness, and the ongoing creative activity are the same divine reality in different modes. This is remarkably close to the philosophical position of Advaita Vedanta and to the Taoist understanding that the Tao and Ti are not two things. The Egyptians arrived at this philosophical recognition through their theological practice of syncretism, not as an abstract philosophical argument, but as a lived devotional reality. The many-named God. In the Leiden hymn to Amun, a remarkable passage states that Amun is three, but his body is hidden in the other gods, making him, in his totality, one. This is a clear statement of Egyptian theological monotheism. Behind the multiplicity of divine names and forms is a single divine reality that expresses itself differently in different aspects. Thans are the one God seen from different angles. Heliopolitan theology is the philosophical foundation of this understanding. The any 9 specific divine beings are all ultimately expressions of the one Atum who contains them all. Atum did not create 9 separate beings who are now independent from him. The Ennead are Atum's own self-differentiation. They are the one becoming many without ceasing to be one. Connection to heligricity. That all the different divine names are the Heliopolitan principle of divine syncretism expressions of a single underlying reality is the philosophical bedrock of what heligricity calls synthesis. When heligricity honors Chi, Prana, Noifra, Ka, and Ash as different names for the same life force, it is practicing Egyptian syncretism. When it recognizes that Tao, Brahman, Yah, the great mystery, and infinite intelligence are all pointing at the same nameless source, it is living the Atum-Ra principle. The heligric synthesis is not syncretism as compromise. It is syncretism as philosophical honesty, the recognition that no single tradition has the complete name of the divine, and that all complete names, spoken together, point toward the one that has no final name. The Heliopolitan afterlife, the solar path. The Heliopolitan philosophy developed a specific and distinctive afterlife doctrine, different from, though related to, the more widely known Osirian afterlife. The Heliopolitan afterlife is the solar path, the journey of the deceased soul, as a companion of Ra in his eternal journey through sky and duat, the pyramid texts and royal afterlife. The pyramid texts, inscribed in the burial chambers of 5th dynasty pharaohs beginning around 2400 BCE, are the oldest substantial religious literature in the world, and are primarily Heliopolitan in character. They describe the afterlife of the pharaoh in terms of the solar journey. The dead king rises to the sky, joins Ra in his bark, travels with the sun across the heavens and through the duat, and participates in the eternal cycle of creation and renewal. The pyramid texts address the dead pharaoh directly with remarkable intimacy and urgency. "O king, you have not departed dead, you have departed alive." They describe the king's ascent to the sky in vivid terms, climbing the solar ladder, being received by Ra, crossing the celestial waters, becoming one of the imperishable stars. The democratization of the solar afterlife. In the Old Kingdom, the solar afterlife was the exclusive province of the pharaoh. Only the king was fully divine, only the king could join Ra's eternal bark. Ordinary people's afterlife hopes were understood primarily in terms of their relationship to the king. They shared in his immortality through their connection to his divine person. During the first intermediate period, when the pharaonic system collapsed into regional chaos, something remarkable happened. The afterlife became democratized. The coffin texts began to appear, and ordinary Egyptians began to claim the solar journey for themselves. By the New Kingdom, the Book of the Dead was available to anyone who could afford to have a copy made. Every Egyptian could now aspire to join Ra's bark, to speak the correct words at each gate of the Duat, and to emerge at dawn reborn, the AKH, the glorified solar soul. Central to the Heliopolitan afterlife is the concept of the AKH, the third and highest of the Egyptian soul components. Where the Ka and the Ba remain connected to the physical world and the tomb, the AKH is the fully realized, glorified, immortal self, the soul in its most radiant form. The AKH was associated with light, with the stars, and with the Duat's most luminous regions. An AKH was a soul that had successfully completed the afterlife journey, passed through all the gates, spoken all the necessary words of power, and achieved integration with Ra's solar light. The Egyptians used the word Ak to describe both the glorified dead and the concept of effectiveness or magical power, suggesting that the glorified soul is, above all, a being of concentrated, radiant efficacy. Connection to holographicity. The Heliopolitan afterlife is solar journey. The soul traveling with Ra through darkness and emerging reborn at dawn is the cosmic scale version of every heligric night-to-day practice. The heligric practitioner who moves through the darkness of sleep consciously, who allows the night to be a genuine duat, and who meets the rise of the day as Zep-Tepeth her first time, is living the Heliopolitan solar afterlife in miniature every single day. The DNA phantom effect tells us that the energetic pattern of the self persists beyond the body's dissolution. The Heliopolitan AKH tells us what that persisting pattern aspires to, the full radiance of a consciousness that has traveled through its own darkness and emerged as light. The Bennu bird phoenix, renewal, and the soul's return. Among all the sacred creatures associated with the Heliopolitan temple and theology, none is more extraordinary than the Bennu, the sacred bird of Heliopolis, that would eventually become the Greek phoenix and enter the Western imagination as the ultimate symbol of death and renewal. What the Bennu was. The Bennu was a large, heron-like bird. Most scholars associate it with the gray heron, or a now extinct species of giant heron that lived in Arabia. It was sacred to both Ra and Osiris, connecting the solar and the resurrection theologies in one bird. The Bennu is believed to rest on the Ben stone in the innermost sanctuary of the Heliopolitan temple, making it, along with the sacred obelisk, the most direct manifestation of the first time present in the physical world. In the pyramid texts, the king is described as the Bennu, the soul that returns to the Ben, that alights on the first mound after the long journey, that sings the first call at the beginning of each new cycle. The Bennu's cry was said to be the silence of none and initiated the first time, before Adam, before anything. There was the cry of the Bennu calling existence into being. The Phoenix tradition. The Greek historian Herodotus visited Heliopolis in the 5th century BCE and recorded what the priest told him about the Bennu, translating it into the Greek world as the Phoenix story. In Herodotus's account, the phoenix was a bird from Arabia that lived for 500 years, then flew to Heliopolis carrying its dead parent's body wrapped in myrrh, deposited at the altar of the sun god, and flew back to Arabia. Later Greek and Roman writers elaborated this into the complete phoenix myth. The bird that builds its own funeral pyre, is consumed by fire, and rises from the ashes reborn. The full fire and ashes version of the phoenix myth does not appear in surviving Egyptian texts. It is a later elaboration, probably combining the Bennu tradition with other sources. But the core of the myth, the sacred bird that is intimately connected with the sun, with death and renewal, and with the sacred center at Heliopolis, is genuinely Heliopolitan. The Bennu and the Ba. In funerary theology, the Bennu was associated with the Bet, the personal spirit aspect of the soul that could leave the body after death and travel freely. The Ba is depicted in Egyptian art as a human-headed bird, a being that has the consciousness of a person and the freedom of a bird. The connection between the Ba and the Bennu suggests that the soul's post-death freedom is of the same essential nature as the Bennu's freedom, the capacity to move between worlds, to rest on the first mound, to be present at the moment of creation's renewal, connection to haligicity, the Bennu, the bird whose song breaks the silence before the first time, who rests on the Benben between cycles, who is both Are's companion and Osiris's symbol, carries the Heliopolitan recognition that renewal is not the destruction of what was, but the return to the origin that makes a new beginning possible. In haligric understanding, the soul between lives is in a state analogous to the Bennu resting on the Benben, gathered back to the source, present at the threshold, preparing for the cry that will initiate the next cycle. The Phoenix tradition death, as the preparation for a more radiant rebirth, is one of the deepest metaphors in the haligric vocabulary of personal transformation. The Heliopolitan legacy, what this philosophy gave the world. The Heliopolitan philosophy did not remain contained within the borders of ancient Egypt. Through the channels of conquest, trade, cultural exchange, and the absorption of Egyptian ideas by Greek, Roman, Jewish, and early Christian thinkers, the Heliopolitan system became one of the foundational sources of Western religious and philosophical thought. The Greek philosophical debt. Pythagoras reportedly spent 22 years studying with Egyptian priests learning mathematics, astronomy, musical theory, and philosophy. His doctrine of transmigration of souls and the mathematical structure of reality are consistent with Egyptian theological teaching. Plato visited Egypt and incorporated Egyptian ideas into his Timaeus in ways that parallel the Heliopolitan Atum-Ra cosmology. The Neoplatonic philosopher Plotinus developed his doctrine of the One, the intellect, and the soul in a way that structurally parallels the Heliopolitan Atum, the Ennead, and the created world. The biblical debt. Moses was, according to the book of Acts, instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. The Hebrew Scriptures' account of creation in Genesis 1 is structurally parallel to the Heliopolitan Nun, the formless, dark, watery chaos before the Creator God's first act. The identification of God's creative power with speech parallels both the Heliopolitan Atum's self-naming and the Memphite theology of PTA's creation through thought and word. The Gospel of John's opening is the Heliopolitan Memphite theology of creation through the divine word, transmitted through the Alexandrian synthesis of Egyptian and Greek philosophy. Hermeticism and the Western esoteric tradition. The most direct transmission of Heliopolitan philosophy into the Western esoteric tradition occurred through the Hermetic literature, the body of text Atrimes Trismegistus, the Greek-Egyptian synthesis of Thoth and Hermes, produced in Alexandria between the 1st and 3rd centuries CE. These texts, including the Corpus Hermeticum and the Emerald Tablet, transmit the Heliopolitan understanding of creation, the solar soul's journey, the relationship between macrocosm and microcosm, and the potential for human consciousness to ascend through knowledge to divine union. From the Hermetic literature, these ideas flowed into alchemy, Renaissance magic and philosophy, Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, Theosophy, and ultimately the New Thought movement of the 19th and 20th centuries, from which Louise Hay, Neville Goddard, and Amest Holmes, all key sources in haligicity, drew their foundational ideas. The Resurrection Template. The Osirian resurrection narrative, itself a Heliopolitan theological product, since Osiris is a member of the Ennead, is the direct template for the Christian resurrection story. The parallels are structural. A divine being of royal lineage, murdered through treachery, whose body is found, restored through magical divine intervention, and who rises to eternal life as ruler of the afterlife. This parallel has been documented extensively by scholars of comparative religion since the 19th century. The Heliopolitan theology of death as transformation and the risen divine being as the model for human post-to-death experience is the philosophical core of both. Heliopolis and haligicity where the paths cross. The Heliopolitan philosophy is not background material for haligicity. It is one of the oldest and most complete expressions of the principles that haligicity holds as central. These are the specific convergences, none, and the infinite field. Haligicity's understanding that behind all manifested reality is an infinite field of undifferentiated potential, what New Thought calls the infinite field of possibilities, what quantum physics calls the quantum vacuum, is the Heliopolitan none. Every act of haligric manifestation practice begins by touching none, by returning to the state of open, receptive, dark potential before the specific form arrives. This is not a metaphor in haligicity. The none is what is actually present when the mind goes quiet. Atum and the self-created self, the Heliopolitan teaching that the first divine act was self-creation, consciousness knowing itself into existence, is the philosophical foundation of every haligric practice that involves knowing oneself more deeply. The I am declarations of New Thought, the Advaita Vedanta recognition of Atman as Brahman, the Rastafari E and I all are expressions of the Atum principle. You are not waiting for the divine to arrive from elsewhere. You are, in your deepest nature, the divine that has already arrived and is in the ongoing act of knowing itself. Zep Tepi and the Sacred Rise. The Heliopolitan recognition that every dawn is the first time that the rise of the day is not a repetition, but a renewal, not a return of the same, but the continually fresh emergence of existence from its own source, is the philosophical foundation of the Heligric sacred rise practice. Grand rising is not a greeting. It is a theological statement. The first time is happening again, and you are awake to meet it. The three-phase solar cycle and the tetralty. Ra's daily journey, Kepri Ara Atum, provides the temporal template for how the Heligric practitioner moves through any creative cycle. A Heligric day, a Heligric project, a Heligric lifetime all follow the same are fresh beginning, full expression, conscious completion, and return. The tetralty maps onto this cycle, feeling as the Kepri phase, thinking as the organizational phase, speaking as the full expression phase, doing as the atom completion, the integration of the cycle into the ground from which the next one will rise. The Aeneid is cosmological tetralty. The Aeneid, the 9 deities that map the process from undivided consciousness through complementary polarity to the drama of civilization, wisdom, disruption, and the liminal is the cosmos practicing what the tetralty describes. The universe itself is engaged in feeling, thinking, speaking, and doing. The tetralty is not a human tool imposed on the cosmos. It is the pattern the cosmos uses to know itself. The many names of the One. The Heliopolitan practice of syncretism, recognizing that Atum and Ra and Kepri are all expressions of the same divine reality experience from different angles, is the philosophical charter for the Heligric synthesis. Every tradition honored in Heligricity is a different Aeneid member, a different face of the one divine reality that has no final face. The Heligric synthesis is not eclecticism or spiritual shopping. It is the practice of Atum Ra, holding the many names together in the recognition that all of them are pointing at the one that contains all of them. Isis, Heka, and the creative power of consciousness. Isis, the greatest magical practitioner in the Heliopolitan Aeneid, works through Heka, the Egyptian magical force that is most precisely translated as the creative power of consciousness itself. Heka is not sorcery or superstition. It is the recognition that consciousness is the primary creative substance. Every thought, feeling, word, and action is a Heka act. The Heligric tetralty is the practical structure of Heka, the 4 dimensions through which conscious creative power moves from source to manifestation. He who came into being by himself, the all and the nothing, the completed whole, Atum standing on the first mound in the first moment, looking out over the waters of none, holding every possible thing in an undivided stillness that was about to become the world. The Helopian, theology, parapamast from the pyramid texts. The priests of On understood something that every serious practitioner of every serious tradition eventually arrives at, that the divine is not a being out there, requiring appeasement or petition, but the self-knowing consciousness that has always been here before the world, within the world, and present in the deepest stillness of every human awareness that dares to sit quietly enough to meet it. Atum is what you find when you stop looking. The first time is happening now. None is here, beneath every thought, as wide and dark and full of potential as it has always been. Grand Rising. Personal Randing Sales or Heligristic production, May 2028.